In the late 16th century, this very coastline represented the ultimate frontier. A group of English settlers arrived here with enough supplies and ambition to build a permanent home in the New World. But Roanoke Island was more isolated than they realized. The dream of a thriving colony soon gave way to a grueling struggle for survival against an environment they didn't yet understand. The conditions deteriorated quickly. Brutal weather patterns hammered the coast, and the colony's primary food stores were depleted far faster than they could be replenished. Security became the primary concern. As relations with nearby tribes reached a breaking point, the settlers began keeping constant watch through the night, interpreting every sound from the forest as a potential threat. Faced with the slow collapse of his people, Governor John White reached a Hridaya Vidarak Nirnai, a heart-wrenching choice that would change the course of American history. This map shows how far removed they were from help. White decided to return to England to secure food and tools. He was forced to navigate thousands of miles of open Atlantic water, leaving his family behind with the promise of a swift return. Governor White firmly believed he was leaving for just a few short months. Instead, the moment his ship disappeared over the horizon, the clock began ticking on a tragedy no one could have predicted. When White reached the English docks, he found the country in a state of total mobilization. A massive naval war had erupted between England and Spain. Every seaworthy vessel was seized by the Queen's orders to defend against the Spanish Armada. The seas were effectively closed, trapping White in England for nearly 3 agonizing years. He spent those years haunted by images of his family waiting in the Vanya Pradesh, the deep wilderness, wondering if they were still alive to see the ships arrive. It wasn't until 1590 that White finally secured a vessel. He returned to the Outer Banks of North America, desperate to find what was left of his people. As his boat neared the island through a wall of heavy fog, there was no smoke from chimneys and no voices calling from the shore. Only a heavy, oppressive silence met him. The long-awaited reunion had arrived, but the absence of any signs of life suggested that the colony had already been lost. White stepped onto the island expecting to find a disaster site, ruins, graves, or the remains of a conflict. Instead, the settlement was eerily pristine. There were no bodies and no evidence of a struggle. No blood was found, and no abandoned weapons were scattered. The most striking detail was the state of the buildings. The houses hadn't been burned or knocked down. They had been carefully dismantled and moved, leaving only empty clearings in the trees. This suggests the departure was a planned, coordinated effort, rather than a sudden attack. The settlers had the time to take their homes with them. The only physical mark that they left behind was an inscription on a wooden gatepost, the word CROATOAN. White was left standing among the empty foundations, looking at a message that provided a possible destination, but offered no explanation for the total disappearance of his family. One possibility is that the settlers moved to the nearby CROATOAN Island, choosing to integrate with the local tribe as their food supplies failed. Others suggest they tried to migrate further south or inland, potentially losing their way or falling victim to the elements during the journey. There are darker theories involving internal divisions or unknown forces within the American wilderness that might have scattered the group before they could find safety. Even with modern technology, the island refuses to yield its secrets. Extensive archaeological digs and radar scans have failed to locate any remains or burial sites associated with the missing colonists. 4 centuries later, the specifics of their fate remain mal main de fond, buried in silence, just as they were in 1590. Roanoke remains one of history's most enduring mysteries because it represents a moment where an entire community simply stepped off the map. Ka unsadasyon ko jivan ka margmila, Yahweh asi rat kashi karbunge, jiski koi por nahithi. More than 400 years have passed, and that single carved word remains our only connection to their final moments.